Okay, brilliant. So a bit of housekeeping just before we begin. My name is Libby, and I'm very honoured to be hosting Stephen today. So Stephen set off as a junior doctor for 6 years of cycling around the whole world, and his journey was kind of very much influenced by his experience in medicine, and he had some real trials and tribulations and amazing adventures along the way. So without further ado, Stephen Fabes, everybody.
Thanks so much. So I'll start from the beginning, I guess. I was back in 2010, I was working as a junior doctor. I was working in St Thomas's Hospital, which is this sort of large, prestigious ivory white building opposite the Houses of Parliament. And I've been qualified for a few years when I, after work one day, I brought a little mini atlas down to the pub, and surrounded by some friends, I kind of announced that I would like to cycle around the world. And I explained that not only would this be a great adventure, but probably it'd be quite easy as well, because I've been on bike rides before. I've been on bike rides that lasted a whole day. So if I just did that again and again and again, I can eventually get around the world. At the time, there was kind of part of me, I suppose, that was quite interested in climbing up the career ladder and getting more responsibility. I really enjoyed my job. And that's very much the culture of medicine. And there was another part of me that kind of just wanted to blow up my life and go on a bit of an adventure. And that part won out in the end. So a couple of years after that day, that evening in the pub, I was standing outside St Thomas's Hospital next to a fully loaded touring bicycle with my new life kind of squeezed into 4 panniers. And my plan was to try to cycle around the world, the length of 6 continents. That was the vague idea, and didn't really know how long that would take. I thought probably at least 4.5 years. It ended up taking just over 6. So I was outside the hospital, fully loaded touring bike, surrounded by friends, family, doctors, nurses, and I waved everybody goodbye, and I set off feeling kind of good, excited, confident, all those things. And then those feelings lasted until I got to Westminster Bridge, which is about 50 meters away. And it started to dawn on me all the different ways that I might not be cut out for a bike ride around the world, including a very, very sketchy sense of direction, no real skill in fixing bicycles, and I hadn't done any physical preparation, any training at all through the journey. So it was a pretty difficult start. I'd been cycling around the world for about 20 minutes when I realised that I was coming past this pub that I'd had the idea in a couple of years ago. So I stopped in the pub. I got stuck in the pub really for a few hours whilst my friends and family thought I was on my way to France. And some friends arrived down to the pub like a kind of intervention, and I was basically bullied out of the pub and back onto my bicycle. And my first day of cycling around the world, I made it to Bexley Heath, where I collapsed into a guest house and kind of fell asleep very quickly, and then woke up to white light pouring through the window. And this was the outside was covered in snow, and I'd left during the coldest European winter for 31 years. So kind of yeah, I suppose a quite dramatic start to the journey. As I said, it took just over 6 years to get home again. I've spent the last 3.5 years writing a book, published by Profiles, called, sit by me there, called Signs of Life. The book really is a travel book. It's a travel narrative. It's a sort of chronological account of a 6-year adventure. Hopefully, it's a sort of entertaining travel book, but it's also there are a couple of threads running through the narrative as well. So one of which is as I progressed through the journey, I started becoming interested in visiting remote medical projects. And to begin with, this was really just a way to kind of sate my own curiosity. I was interested in medicine, healthcare. I missed my job. And I was also doing a bit of journalism at that point. So I was interested in writing about some of the medical projects that I was visiting. I also got this kind of sense that as a cyclist, I was getting lots of hospitality. People were very kind to me, as they often are to traveling cyclists, because you're quite blatant and you're moving slowly through places. So you tend to get a very rosy kind of view of the world. But I did get a sense that I wasn't really getting, to the bottom, or getting, I suppose, I was quite a fleeting visitor. I wasn't anywhere. I didn't have the language. I didn't have the time to get to the heart of things. So sometimes it was quite. I felt that visiting these medical projects would give me a different perspective, I think. So I visited a number of remote medical projects as I travelled, many of which were sort of serving marginalised people. I wasn't working in these projects. I was there observing, and they got me thinking about the social context of health and disease, the sort of social and political forces kind of underlying health and disease. And so that's another thread that runs through the book, is a kind of another parallel journey. It's a sort of a journey of my furthering my own understanding, really, I suppose, about these about health and healthcare. And there are a few sort of flashbacks to my own work in the NHS. So that's one strand, and there's another strand from the book as well, which is about the early adventurers and sort of pioneering, especially adventure cyclists at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, and I've included those for a number of reasons. First of all, because the Victorians are sometimes just inadvertently very funny in the way they write, and I quite liked delving into these old travel books. Spent a lot of time in the British Library sort of researching. And they also, I think, they give you an idea about some of the attitudes of the day, and also you're able to reflect upon how places have changed in the sort of intervening time. So I've kind of included a few stories as well from sort of early cyclists and other adventurers. So yeah, I guess that's the book, and it was published in August. It's available in hardback at the moment, and there'll be a paperback available at some point in the summertime.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to that. Stephen, I know that you kind of wrote in your book about, visiting various different medical projects. How was it for you coming from, kind of a very privileged country where we have all the infrastructure and equipment to deal with these medical issues that you were kind of happening upon? How was that for you, and how did you kind of really deal with that as you were cycling around?
Well, in terms of the medical projects, I don't think I really had a very sort of clear plan about the kind of projects I was going to visit to begin with. It was sort of word of mouth. I think being as a doctor, you are in quite a privileged position. It kind of opens lots of doors, and often other medical professionals will be very happy to kind of show me around different medical projects and clinics and explain a bit about the work they did there. And that gave me an opportunity to think about some of the undercurrents, I suppose. There's the political and social forces at work. That's something I found in London. So I think working in the NHS gives me that perspective as well. You, as a doctor, you're hearing people's stories all the time, and when you hear enough stories, that gets you thinking about some of the way London works, and again, some of the sort of social context to health. So that was one of the reasons that motivated me to see these medical projects. They were varied. There were some very inspiring people involved. There was some quite shocking things that you wouldn't see in the UK. There, so to try and list a few of the projects, there was a mental health rehab project in Mumbai. There was a floating medical clinic on the Tonle Sap in Cambodia. There's this sort of crumbling sanatorium for patients with tuberculosis in Georgia and the Caucasus. There was an orthopedic ward in Afghanistan. There were, and there was one of the first projects I visited in Africa was a mobile medical clinic for nomads in an area called Turkana, which is a very remote part of Kenya. I mean, many of them got me thinking about how complicated healthcare, or how complicated the sort of the forces affecting health are, and how sort of interconnected. And I think sometimes when we think about health in resource poor settings, we often think that, you know, poverty is the primary cause of poor health, and that's the narrative, and that of course is a very important. But when I was visiting, for example, this medical project in Turkana, which is a mobile medical clinic for the nomads, that there's I was really taken aback, I suppose, by after thinking about all the different things that might be contributing to the health of the people in that region. It was quite complex. There were, in that region, was going through a very severe drought. So you could see the effects of climate change. There were dams being built on the Omo River to allow multinationals to plant cash crops. So there was the impact of sort of foreign investment, foreign money. There was conflict in the region, so that certainly had an impact as well. There was the marginalization of the people who lived there, marginalized culturally, economically, politically, geographically. So there were lots of, and far more things besides that. So lots of different things involved. So that was I guess that was my first impression when I started visiting these projects, with just how complicated things really were. And then, yeah, I visited, I just, most of the medical projects were based in Asia, and the book is, although it's a 6-year bike ride, that's quite difficult to put 6 years in one book, so I've had to be quite selective with the stories I've told. But I would say, I think there's 20 chapters in the book, about 11 chapters are based in Asia. So there's more of a focus on Asia, and that's certainly where I was more there's a stronger sort of medical theme.
Okay, great. And I'm just going to ask one of the questions actually that we've received now. Liz Allen has asked, do you think that seeking out medical projects apart from a personal interest was a need to justify your journey?
It was. Well, it's a good question. I think it definitely invested my journey with a sense of, I felt that I was invested with a sense of purpose by doing that, because I felt quite burnt out. I'd been cycling more than 6 years, but after about 4 years, I was feeling really burnt out. I needed something else to focus on, I think, and I began to miss my job more and more as I travelled. So I've always been very curious about medicine and healthcare, so it was a way to satisfy my own curiosity. It was something to write about. It was something that really interested me, and that was probably the beginning of it. Yeah. So it changed how I travel as well. I think if you're writing about something, I think being a writer makes you a kind of more curious person, because then you're asking lots of questions, because if you're gonna
absolutely, it gives you a very investigative slant, outlook, doesn't it? Would you mind giving us a bit of a read from part of your book? That would be wonderful, please.
So I spent I've got a couple of short bits I wanted to read from, but just to sort of, before I start this one of the things I loved about this journey was the wild camping, and for me that was very much part of cycle touring. I was cycling around the world. I also was kind of wild camping around the world. That's kind of how I thought of it as well. I got really addicted to it, and it's kind of like hide and seek against the world, really, for various reasons. But I think I'll just do the reading, and maybe I can talk a little bit about wild camping afterwards. So the next day I continued west, and by nightfall near Pahan, I was ducking behind some bushes to conceal my campsites. Inside my tent, I could hear men's voices. They came and went and popped up close by. Footfall, 2, slow, determined steps, psychopathic steps. All went quiet again until a dog stalked over, a Doberman, probably, rabid and toothy, with yellow eyes. It had just the bark. This primal sense of dread was one of the many reasons I'd fallen in love with camping stealthily on the edge of towns. Sleeping in this liminal space can feel as heady as camping in the wild, especially when it's against the law, as it was in Myanmar. There was a feeling during these nightly detours of stalking society. It felt thrillingly outsiderish. I was the thief at the window, childishly fun, like a game of hide and seek. I was rough sleeping around the world as much as cycling around it both defined my journey. Usually, it was easy enough to find a patch of earth to call my own, but I fancied myself an expert now. To dodge detection, I was strategic. Camping high beats camping low, for instance. People look down at things more often than up at them. Pitching your tent is best done on the cusp of darkness too, when you can evaluate your campsite before night falls and hides you away. Camp too early and you risk getting spotted. Camp too late when it's dark and you'll inevitably wake up the next morning beside a sign saying something like, warning, mine clearance in progress. Of all the nights I'd spent hiding away in my tent, most had been lost to memory. There were a few I recalled as glorious victories: the Jordanian cliff top, the Californian sea cave, the centre of a French roundabout, the ramparts of a ruined Ottoman castle. Others I remembered as stonking defeats, and I've catalogued these as if they were dated horror movies: the night of the fire ants, the dawn of the scorpion under my thermarest, the midnight of the flood in Australia. On this occasion, when the footfalls turned out to be a few wandering kids and not an axe-wielding sociopath, there was a sense of escape that washed away all the fear and seemed to make the whole process ecstatically worth it.
Do you miss that, the danger element of the wild camping and what you're going to find?
Yeah, I didn't have many problems. I spent more than 1,000 nights by roadsides. I had very few problems during that time, so I think it is kind of generally safe enough to do. But I really loved it. And the thing was that the way that I treated it was hide and seek against the world, though, because I think if you get spotted, most of the time, someone coming up, that person is not going to cause you any problems at all. But in a lot of these sleepy villages around the world, not much happens, and you're news. So that person will go away and they'll, tell the village or something. There's this kind of foreigner on a bicycle camping over there, and then you might get visitors in the nighttime, and that can be a little bit stressful sometimes. It wasn't unknown I remember in particular in Ethiopia, I'd wake up in the morning, and at some point in the early hours, some children had kind of found my tent and had unzipped it and had been sort of watching me sleep. And you kind of wake up to like 16 faces in your tent porch. So there were a few dramatic moments involved in rough camping on my journey. I was marched out of my tent at gunpoint at once in Peru. It's a story that I mentioned in the book. And there are a bunch of other problems as well, sometimes with police and things like that. But I just really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the challenge of rough camping, and it really signified the freedom that you get on a long bike ride, that you can just throw down the tent by the side of the road, and that's your bedroom for the night. And I do miss that now that I'm home and I've got a bed. Yeah.
I feel a bit easy getting into bed at night. I haven't worked hard enough for this.
Yeah, a little bit.
On the way home, after you've been on the road for nearly 6 years, you had this amazing meeting, which I remember you talking about when I've watched you speak, where you kind of met up with Heinz, the world's most dedicated cycling vagabond, and he's stellar, isn't he? He's kind of done over 500,000, over 650,000 kilometers over 51 years of cycle touring. How was that as you were kind of coming home from this epic journey?
Yeah, so Heinz was kind of like I felt like he was a kind of ghost that I was chasing. I'd sort of stay with people occasionally who maybe had met him in different locations around the world, and I went through a bike shop, visited a bike shop in Hong Kong, which is the place that he would always go to in Hong Kong. So Heinz is this guy. He's, I suppose, in the cycle touring world, he'd be a sort of minor celebrity, in that he's just done. He was in the Guinness Book of World Records as the most traveled man in history in the 90s, and he cycled, I think, to 195 different countries. Left his home in Germany. I think he was in his early 20s, in the 60s, and then he spent 51 years cycling around the world without returning home. the equivalent of 16 times around the planet. He returned to his home in Germany 2 years before I met him. I found out where he was living. I managed to contact him eventually, and he invited me to come and stay. He's a complicated guy and a really like obsessive guy. He was kind of collecting, he'd managed to collect lots of different things from his bike journey. He'd collected every little tire that he'd used. He'd cut off 100 little piece, and he had 144 little pieces of tire, and he had all the various hats that he'd worn and things like that. And he would post these things to his sister, or to this place called the bunker, which was a little room that he had in Paris. So he's always on the move. He was an obsessive, interesting guy. We didn't always see eye to eye. I won't give too much away, because what I managed to do in the book, I've dedicated I've done a bit of a character sketch, I suppose, of Heinz, because he's such an interesting person. But we didn't always see eye to eye. We had kind of different political views, and there is, I suppose, a slightly political edge to this book. And we did disagree on some things, but he was interesting, and he was a great host. And I think it was very important for me to meet him at the end of my journey, when I was really questioning what I wanted out of life, and I was looking forward to rejoining my job and being reunited with people that I'd really missed. I understood very clearly that I wasn't Heinz. I wasn't like him. I didn't have this insatiable urge to continue wandering. I was happy that this journey was coming to an end. I was tired and I was a bit burnt out, and I was as I said, just looking forward to sort of rejoining life and being a participant, and not just constantly observing things.
And what a year you arrived back. It was quite a tumultuous year, and the chapter that you dedicate to that in your book is really kind of eye-opening, and it's interesting, reading that, all those things that happened in 1 year, terror attacks and Brexit and all sorts. How was it coming back into such a tumultuous, crazy year?
Yeah, it sounds strange, doesn't it, to say that 2016 was tumultuous, considering what happened in 2016.
Now it does.
Yeah, but it did feel like that, though. Suddenly, when I came home in 2016, there was a very clear, it felt like a mood of division. Britain was covered in these breaking point posters. As you mentioned, there was the election of Trump. There was the referendum. There was like various, there were a number of big sort of terrorist attacks, and the murder of Joe Cox, and all kinds of sort of weird things were happening at the time. That was really very much in contrast to my big take-home things from the journey as well, which were that we're all kind of hopelessly and intimately connected, and that's generally a good thing. Although I suppose you could argue that things like COVID suggest that it's not always a good thing. And I think I also got a sense that we're all very similar, or certainly that we're more similar than we are different. That can sound quite trite, I think, when you say that, but I don't think anyone should apologize for saying it either, because I think in the current political climate, it can't really be said enough. But I think I probably formed that view, or had that, because of my perspective. First of all, as a cyclist, you're privy to quite a lot of everyday life, and you realize that everyday life is quite similar all over the world. So it reminds me how similar people are. And I think also, perhaps as a doctor as well, that also made me think in that way, because as a doctor, you're dealing with the sort of raw machinery of our humanness, I suppose, our blood and bones. So we realised that we're quite all very similar on the inside too. So yeah, it was an odd time to come home. It was difficult coming home as well. The facts of my life were not great at this point. I was a 35-year-old single, unemployed blogger, in debt to all his friends, living with his mum. So it was tough. And I remember I couldn't go straight back to work. There was various like retraining and sort of bureaucracy I had to do. And I remember following my mum around. She was buying me clothes in Sports Direct, and I was kind of like following her around, and she was holding up jeans for me to try on. And I looked over, and there was this kind of 10-year-old following his mum who was doing the same thing. And we kind of like shared a little look that was like you know, mums. So it was yeah, it was a bit odd to come home to that, but it was nice to see my mum again. I hadn't seen her for a while, so it was yeah, there's some upsides as well.
Some definite upsides. I remember in your book you mentioned being in a supermarket and then suddenly being aware that you're actually trying to change gear whilst gripping onto the trolley. Anne has asked, you know, how was it settling into writing a book and kind of being stuck inside? So how did all of those things, you know, kind of affect you? And I love that, trying to change gear on the supermarket trolley. Brilliant.
I loved the process of writing a book most of the time. It took quite a long time to put it together. I'd obviously, again, 6 years in one book is always going to be hard. I had to play with the pace a little bit. The book was probably quite fast paced at the beginning, and then it kind of soon settles down, and so there's a real focus on Asia. And I enjoyed spending time in the British Library trying to unearth all these interesting stories of adventurers, the adventurers of yesteryear. So it was good. Yeah, the process though, I mean, I was blogging during the time that I was away. That's how it started. I wasn't, the idea of the book came fairly early on, but I didn't have a trouble with a phone or computer, so I had a lot of time to read. So I read in my tent in the evening times, and then I was reading a lot of travel books. And I think once you start, I was reading a lot of everything, but when you're reading a lot of travel, I was kind of interested in perhaps I could write a travel book as well. And it's the fact that I was blogging regularly was great practice to sort of develop, and a good way to develop as a writer. And then I ran out of money after about 3 years on the road. So my way to earn money was through writing for freelance, usually for adventure travel publications. And so I was writing articles and I was writing blog pieces. So I had sort of quite a lot of material from those to dig into for the book, although I'd say the book's quite very different to the blog posts that I was writing. The blog posts I would be kind of just bashing them out, and once a month in an internet cafe somewhere. And it was really, it felt really like a luxury to spend time with the writing and to spend time on the book. And so I've been working part-time as a doctor again in the same hospital, St Thomas's, for 2 or 3 days a week, and then the rest of the time writing. I've been doing that for a few years, and it's lovely. It gives me some balance as well. I do a lot of running as well. So between the running and the writing and the medicine, I feel like I've got sort of a good balance at the moment, although I'm not really climbing the medical career ladder.
But amazing things are happening anyway. Just for everyone's amusement, Stephen kind of casually rattled off that he's running 20 miles this afternoon as part of his marathon training, like you do. Ted, on your blog, Ted has commented that you're closing your blog. Is that right? And so he's asked, would it be then preferable to buy your book? Obviously, it's preferable to buy your book. Yes, Ted.
As I said, I think that the book's pretty different to the blog. I mean, obviously there's some of the same stories are there, but it's I didn't, in the blog, I wasn't really writing about healthcare and about that sort of side of the journey. And obviously with the book, you've got a bit more time to sort of refine the writing and things like that, and reflect on flashback into memoir and things, episodes from working as a junior doctor. So yeah, I think the blog is quite different. You're right, I am winding up the blog. I've got a new, so it used to be, so when I was traveling, it used to be called Cycling the Six, and that was my blog, but I'm moving everything to stephenfabes.com, where there is also like a blog or a journal, which I'm going to sort of write posts every now and again. So I still will have a blog.
Great.
Obviously it'd be great.
Good news. But obviously you have to buy the book because all of the secret stuff's in there. Kate has asked that in your book you said you had a lot of physiological tests before you went. Did you have those again when you came back, and what particularly was it that was interesting to you about those?
Yeah, so before I left, I had this bunch of these tests, medical tests, to see how my body might change over the course of the journey. Some of these were so unpleasant that I don't want to go through it again. So There was one where I had a tube put up my nose and sort of goes down to my esophagus to the level of my diaphragm, and then they put big magnets to my neck, and it felt very much and looked like I was being electrocuted. I've got a video of that actually. Maybe I'll post that on my new blog at one point. There were big biopsies of my quadriceps. There was some really painful procedures. I did get some of the tests repeated, and I haven't actually fully had those analysed yet. MRI scans of my legs and things like that. Yeah, that's something I still need to do. So I don't have all the results, but I can kind of get back to people on that, I suppose. I'll post something on my website at some point.
Yeah, that'd be fascinating to find out.
Yeah, I need to get like radiologists who'll have a look at it all. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Please do. Jane has asked how you got involved in the projects as you were traveling around.
I felt it wasn't appropriate for me to be working because I was there only for a short period of time. I didn't have the time to really kind of get to understand the particular community where these medical projects were based, and often I didn't have the language, so it was a struggle. So it would have been a struggle to work as a physician, and perhaps I wouldn't have been that useful. So my role really, although I had my kind of doctor's hat on to a point, I was there really as a writer, I suppose, with a medical background, and I was contemplating, as I said, some of the social context to health. So I was interviewing doctors, nurses, patients. I was interested in people's stories and about some of the things that were going on in that particular location. Yeah, so I wasn't really working, and things happen sometimes suddenly that I became sort of swept up in. I witnessed some accidents where I was having to sort of use my medical skills. There was an incident in San Francisco where sadly a young man fell off a 5-story building when I was present and tried to resuscitate him. There were some incidents like that, but most, when I was setting out to visit these medical projects, I was there as a writer, somewhere to sort of observe and to listen and to find out what was going on from that side, but not to practice medicine really.
Great, and that kind of links nicely onto Mike's question. He kind of asked, did the process of writing change your understanding of your insight of what you'd experienced or of yourself?
I think the process of writing that has definitely certainly changed how I travel, and I think it's changed how I practice medicine as well. I find it very cathartic to write. I think that's been true in the pandemic, working long shifts in A&E, particularly stressful at the height of the first wave and the second wave, and the teams pulls together really well, but I think afterwards you can feel quite drained, and writing about these things, even if writing is never going to see the light of day, writing for myself has been really, really good. It helps me to see things clearer, I think. Yeah, it helps me to ponder, to ask questions of things, so and to make sense of things. So right. Writing is helpful in that way, in that regard.
Yeah, and has that, the writing and your kind of shift in perspective and your travel, has it changed your attitudes on life, work, family and friends? Asks Richard.
Oh, that's a big one.
It is, isn't
it? Has the writing changed my attitude too?
Has the writing and your trip? Yeah,
I think the journey certainly has. Yeah. I spent a lot of time away from people, and I missed people a tremendous amount. People visited me a number of times, actually. Not all of those were included in the book. That's the thing. You have to some people were kind of written out, or they didn't make it didn't make the final cut because, as I said, it's very difficult to condense 6 years into one journey. But I did have friends. I think Ollie is in the book. He joined me for a month in Georgia. So and Claire and Naomi. So there are old friends who joined me for small sections of the ride, and that really helped, I think. Yeah, I think I lost momentum a little bit, having kind of going back to medicine after a long period away. In medicine, you're sort of climbing the career ladder, and now that I've stepped outside that system, I don't really have the motivation to do that as much as I had. And as I said, I feel like I've got a bit more balance. And I think it certainly has shaped my perspective. Yeah, definitely.
Interesting that you said that you kind of focus, a lot of the chapters are focused on Asia in the book. Is that was that a kind of purposeful thing that you might kind of geographically segregate if there are going to be future books? Harry's asked, was Asia the most interesting region that you travelled through?
It was, personally, I found it very interesting, very challenging. It was a real adventure, greatest mountain range on earth. So physically difficult. I went through Mongolia in the winter time, so that was physically difficult. It was, you can feel more out of your depth in Asia, I think, as a sort of Western British traveller than anywhere else. Languages, it's harder to learn, and culturally, it just felt more of a contrast there as well. So yeah, I loved it. And as I said, I think because I was looking for a fresh sense of purpose towards the end of my journey. So Asia, I kind of cycled that right at the end. That was the final continent, Asia, and then Europe again. So that's when I was much more interested in visiting the medical projects, and therefore was able to perhaps understand a little bit more about the places that I was traveling through, and some of the some of the social context, really, which you might not get a view of just as a cyclist. It was eye-opening. And I think also then I was, maybe I'd sort of developed a bit as a travel writer. So I was writing a lot more articles and things, and I was probably taking more notice of the details and things like that towards the end of the journey as well. So there's more material from the Asian, and I was there for longer. I think I was in Asia for a couple of years or something like that. So that's probably why there's a focus on Asia. But yeah, it was a real adventure, it was a real challenge, and it was fascinating.
Oh, amazing. I've got, there are quite a few questions, obviously the inevitable kind of what's next. If it would be okay to kind of ask a few, because I feel like there are a few that you kind of might want to mold the answers, or, you know, combine. Do you still have your bike? Are you back in the NHS now and planning a next trip post-COVID? And then there's also one kind of talking about the social context of health and parallels with the impact of COVID in the UK. So yeah, what's next, I guess?
Bicycle, yeah, my bicycle is still around, Crazy Max, although it's really like falling apart at the moment. It needs like a bit of an overhaul, but yeah, Crazy Max, I still got the same bicycle. I changed so many bits of the bike. It's a bit like Trigger's broom, if anyone's seen that episode of Only Fools and Horses. But it was actually the same frame of the bicycle, but like I think I was 26 tires and 5 roll-off hubs and lots of front hubs and broken spokes and chains and saddles and things. So yeah, I probably will never get rid of Crazy Max. I think we've got too much of a strong bond.
Oh, you couldn't cast him aside, surely. Ted, who has, since our encouragement, gone and bought a copy of your book, says he met an author who did a similar journey and admitted that some years later, having had the experience, he questioned whether he would do it again. How do you feel about that?
I don't think I would do it again. I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I'm glad I've had that experience. It was a great adventure, and there was what I was searching for. I think from the outset was a sense of uncertainty. I felt that my life was a bit mapped out. Although practicing medicine offers some uncertainty as well, I really felt that I was really interested in that sort of feeling vulnerable in wild places, and that sense of the uncertainty that accompanies any kind of adventure. And I got what I asked for, I suppose, but I don't think I would go off on another huge journey like that again. I think I'm pretty content at the moment to be, back in practicing medicine and living in the same place and having friends around me and things. I don't think it's totally. My wanderlust is completely satisfied. I'm sure I'll be going off on other journeys, but much smaller ones, nothing like that. I think that was the only 6-year bike ride I'll take.
And do you still feel like you're kind of unpacking certain elements of your journey?
Yeah, bizarrely. Yeah. I've been home 5 years and there are still things that I sort of struggle with in terms of I didn't have a phone or a computer for most of the journey. So yeah, technology and various other things as well. But yeah, it's surprising how long it takes to readjust, actually. I wish I'd prepared a little bit more for that. I wish I'd considered it. I blindly went in. I was really excited about the prospect of this journey, and I didn't really think about the fallout. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that would have dissuaded me. But it's certainly hard coming home, but great as well.
Amazing. Are you happy to keep answering questions, because we've still got questions coming flooding in? Great.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So if anybody obviously needs to peel off, then please do, but I can't imagine you'd want to, because this is good stuff. Peter asks, Ted has put a comment, a motorbike would be easier, and Peter has asked, do you feel a connection with Che Guevara and the Motorcycle Diaries as he travelled to South America visiting medical institutions?
I suppose not specifically. I did. There was a film, wasn't there? I did watch that a while ago.
Yeah.
Motorbike would have been easier, wouldn't it? Yeah, that's true. I did. I mean, one of the things I like traveling by bicycle is that the feeling of exertion and moving very slowly through the landscape and ending up in these weird places that you would just never go to anyway, just because that's as far as you can get in that day, and so you've just got to stay there.
And it is the most real connection, isn't it? Just being on a bike.
And people use bikes all over the world, so I think there is this kind of, you'll still be this weird outsider and foreigner when you wobble into a village on a bicycle, but there is, I think, something about the bicycle that grants, encourages people maybe to be very hospitable to you. It's perhaps a slightly more humble fare than a vehicle, than a motor vehicle. And yeah, I think that they're just so ubiquitous, and so many people know what it's like to ride a bicycle. And in lots of places in Africa, you'd see people transporting all these goods and food on bikes, and it would be a real pleasure to sort of cycle alongside people, even if you don't have any language in common. So yeah, for me, I'm just smitten with bicycle travel, and I would love to do a bit more of that, but as I said, not for quite as long.
Brilliant. And Bob has asked best saddles, that when you head off again, have you got a preferred saddle of choice?
I just have a Brooks saddle. I mean, that's the classic, isn't it? There are certain brands that people really reach for when it comes to cycle touring, and Brooks seems to be the most popular. But yeah, I went through a few saddles along the way.
Okay. Anthony asks, did your politics change? So perspectives on public health policy, and how did your views change there?
I think I think my politics did change. I think that it made me perhaps just more political. It's interesting. I think a lot of travel, and as I said, we came home in this sort of weird time, 2016, where everything became more political. Art became more political in all its forms. Travel books are not normally political, I think, that would traditionally, but I think what we've started to see is that more and more travel books recently have got sort of a political edge to them, and that's a sign of the times, I think. Yeah, I think my politics, I certainly got me thinking about health inequality, about the health gap, and yeah, and about things like the lack of healthcare workers in certain places, and the brain drain, and again how we're all kind of connected. So there were lots of things that I probably can't really do justice to now. I can't really delve into on Zoom, but those things are probably require a slightly sort of longer discussion, and there, I write about some of those things in the book. Yeah.
Of course. Ian asks, in terms of inequalities, as a doctor and a worldwide cyclist, I suspect that you have seen the effects of inequalities a lot. From your experience, are inequalities the same, but just relative to each country?
I think that you do see the same forces at work, and my patients in the NHS, the ones that are, I see a lot of people really on the margins of society, I think, and I see that the consequences that has for their health. So the impact of marginalization can be, you know, really significant. And I think that is everywhere, that you see that everywhere. Yeah. But I think one of the things that I found visiting different projects, there are problems specific to different areas, and that was really what was motivating me to visit these different places, but then also to find parallels to try and think about how these things might be similar to the problems that I see in the NHS. And a lot of the time, the problems that we have with our health are not necessarily related to the healthcare system in place. They're more related to society as a whole. So they're about, I mean, they could be, you know, about housing, about education, about wealth inequality, about all kinds of things related to society. It's not just the strength of the healthcare system. That's only a sort of small piece of the puzzle. So there are some sort of yeah, there are some overriding themes as well.
Kind of on that, Bob has just typed in, is the NHS the best, or did you see better? That's a big question for you.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think we should be really proud of the NHS.
Yeah,
it's very equitable, but there are certainly problems with it as well. I saw, I mean, every health, you know, I saw an array of different types of healthcare systems, and I think there were people, there were. I suppose I don't feel qualified really to answer that, because, as I said, I was a fleeting visitor. I wasn't anywhere particularly long, and I wasn't researching different healthcare systems in different places. So I can probably comment more upon the individual projects more than the sort of systems in countries, I guess. Yeah.
Right. We've got an anonymous person asking, do you have any tips for a medical student who likes bikes and likes social justice? Thank you.
I don't know. I guess use your imagination and see how you can combine the two. That's I think anyone. So one of my bits of advice was anyone going off on a very long bike ride. Again, if you're planning to be away for years at a time, then it is quite useful to think how you can marry it up to something that you're really passionate about. That's perhaps not, you know, not just the cycling. Because if you've been on the road for a long time, like I was, then you do feel like you need a sort of fresh sense of purpose and something to kind of keep you going and to focus your attention on. Because yeah, if you're cycling every day, that's a lot of time on your own. That's a lot of time to think, and that time at the beginning is a real luxury, but it can be quite overwhelming after a while. So think about other ways that you can focus your attention.
Brilliant. Andrew Sykes asks, are you now perceived as world doctor by your colleagues? So do they consult you at work regarding medical issues they encounter which are more prevalent elsewhere in the world?
Probably not in my hospital, because oddly in my hospital people have got all kinds of training in tropical diseases and that kind of thing. We've got lots of different experts, so not particularly. But London is a very diverse city. People have come from all different places, you know, and it's quite nice to have a chat to people about if they were born outside of the UK, about the places that they've lived in, or if they're visiting. Pre-COVID, we did get quite a lot of people, sort of tourists. We got some tourists in A&E because of where St Thomas's Hospital is located. So yeah, it's nice to talk about different places around the world with my patients sometimes. But I don't think I'm an expert on certainly not an expert on global health or tropical medicine. I think there are definitely people with more expertise than me in that. But yeah, thanks for your question, Andrew. Nice to hear from you. I did this podcast not too long ago. It was great.
And if you haven't kind of had your fill of doctors on bikes, there is another talk at 3 o'clock by a female doctor who's done some adventuring. So please check that out. Tina's asked if you had any accidents or medical emergencies during your travel.
I got dengue at one point. I had an operation on my knee. yeah, so I had a few bits and bobs. I was I felt pretty healthy most of the time, really. Yeah, not too many problems. Lots of like the standard stuff, the kind of like traveler's diarrhea and stuff that you get in, especially in South Asia. But that's all part of the adventure, really. You can't really get away with. You can't really. That's part of the journey. Yeah, I didn't really have any. The biggest risk to me, I think, before I left on this journey, I would kind of dwell on all the horrible things that might go wrong a little bit, especially towards the beginning of the journey, and it would be about the some sort of natural disaster or some sort of like animal attack or getting abducted, and these things are just the major risk to me was a traffic accident. By far the biggest risk to me was a traffic accident. And sadly, when I was on the road, there were cycle tourists who were hit by cars, people that I'd met, people who I'd had heard about were in the vicinity, and some of those unfortunately didn't survive. So it is something to think hard about, I think, if you're planning a bike ride, how to improve your safety. There's things that I would say. Side mirror is really great. You can control how people are passing you. You can you're not carrying on the edge of the road necessarily. You're able to do the so-called safety shuffle, where you if you time it right, you can move a bit into the road if you get the sense that someone is going to pass too close and too fast to you. That it gives you a little bit of space. I think the main thing is just planning your journey so that you're not on these busy roads, and that you're kind of away from those roads as much as possible. I think those are the two most important things you can do in terms of safety. But that's.
Sharon would like to know, how did you finance your trip?
Savings for about 3 years. I was living on about $10 a day, less, so didn't need much. And then after 3 years, my money ran out, and I used there at that point quite a number of different ways to raise money. I was writing freelance for magazines. I was entering a few little travel writing contests, so I got a little bit of income occasionally from that. I was giving talks, and so I was giving talks mainly in international schools, but also, anywhere as I travelled along the way, especially in North America, Australia. So I was able to earn a bit of money from that as well.
Were you selling your photos? Because some of your images are stunning.
I was selling photos. I think I was selling the odd calendar, crowdfunding. It's like it was a real mishmash. It was just kind of, I didn't need a vast amount of money, so I was just trying to figure out how different ways that I could kind of finance the trip, but without stopping and working, because I just wanted to continue to move if that was possible, and it was just about possible in the end.
Which is great, because like you say, you don't want to kind of interrupt the flow too much, do you?
That's it. Yeah.
Margaret's asking, what does the future hold for you? Will you go on the medical ladder, or would you like to pursue being an author further? Have you got the next few epic tomes planned out?
Love to write another book, definitely. But at the moment, I'm quite focused on my career at the moment, and gonna kind of climb the ladder a little bit. But I'll be working on a new book quite soon, I think. After I'm going through a sort of period of revision and stuff, and where I'm changing roles a little bit. But then I will be thinking about what book, the next book. And I actually don't quite know what that's going to be yet. There is a vague idea to write. I'd like to write more about medicine. I may write another travel book. I'd like to write about running, actually. I got really into running as I got back, just because that was a way to cope with my exercise addiction, I think. And I got really interested in running in the running community in London, and lots of different trail races and marathons and ultra marathons. So I'd like to write a bit about that, but certainly not on its own. I'd maybe combine that. I'm thinking just vaguely about a book about medicine, a sort of a memoir about working during the pandemic with alongside about running. It doesn't sound very, I obviously haven't got my elevator pitch sorted yet, but in my head it kind of makes sense.
It would be super interesting, you know, when you were talking about the physical studies that were done and tests and things, and if, you know, if you could do one on the back of your cycle mission and then one on the back of becoming a runner, would be a very interesting comparison.
I was thinking actually of doing, I think, MRI scans when I was completely unfit, untrained, pre-bike ride, and then I had, as soon as I got back after 6 years of cycling, you know, almost every day, and then now I've been running every day. I run, you know, almost every day for the last 4 years. So maybe if I keep running for a couple of years and then get another MRI scan, that would be quite interesting. It won't be particularly important research, but it might be interesting from my perspective, I think, just to see how things have changed.
Really interesting comparison. Patricia has asked, how did you plan your journey? Because there was no commute then.
Because there was no what?
There was no, you know, the webs, you know, the apps were all different, and you said that you were without screens a lot of the time.
I probably did all the wrong things. I obsessed about sort of trying to get sponsors and doing all that kind of stuff at the beginning. Most of that was wasted energy, I think. I didn't plan the route very in much detail, and that was a good thing. It meant that I had a lot of flexibility. I really enjoyed kind of changing my plan on a whim and kind of going off in a different direction based upon the advice of another biker I met, or just because some town had a funny sounding name on the map. So I enjoyed those kind of little mini adventures. I had a rough idea that was sort of London, Istanbul, Cairo, Cape Town, and then I'd kind of figure it out along the way. So I was quite glad that I didn't, and I would suggest that for anyone, if you've got time, if you're planning a cycling tour, I would suggest not planning in too much detail, because you might want some flexibility there. And yeah, that was, and then I spent a bit too long probably obsessing about what kit to bring. Yeah, so I don't know if I did any of the right things, and I did no training. It was like I did no physical preparation at all. So I probably would be
training on the job, aren't you?
yeah, it's true.
Debs and Joe in Stanford have asked a very specific question. You mentioned MRI. Did you do VO2 max testing before and after? Possibly too specific a question for this discussion.
I did. I haven't done one afterwards. I think they did try to do, but I didn't get any kind of result from that. It was a problem with the setup, but I'd love to do that now. Actually, I think that would be quite interesting. But yeah, that was one of the sort of various tests that I had on my list to get done, to see how that would change. But okay. I think probably running would change that as well. So yeah.
How does the system, so Patricia's also asked, how does the system of Western doctors taking leave to help in third world clinics work? Is it too spotty and lack of follow-up of patients to give good medicine?
Yeah, I mean, that's the point really, and that's that there are obviously lots of different organizations. People are out there for varying lengths of time. Yeah. I didn't feel that it was appropriate for me to be sort of, you know, floating into this project, helping and then disappearing again. So that is the issue. And if you really have to be somewhere for a while, I think, to kind of get to understand what's going on, and for your skills to be useful. So it is a bit spotty, I suppose, but equally there are a lot of very dedicated UK trained doctors working in different places around the world, as there are very dedicated, you know, Afghan doctors working in the NHS and Indian doctors working in the NHS, and it's like there's a real exchange of skills and lots of different experience. And you know, having people, I work with people who've worked in South Africa, and they've got some really interesting experience working there, and I think when you've got it helps as a physician to have that experience of working in different places. So, and
interesting bringing in, you know, the slant of going in as a writer as well, rather than just a doctor, well, not just a doctor, but you know, to have that additional slant.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a few more questions coming in. Whilst riding the South Island of New Zealand, I attached a lightweight rod from a fishing pole perpendicular to my rear rack with a yellow flag attached to the end, and had that to prevent traffic passing too close. After installing the rod, traffic passed by me with much more distance between the vehicle and themselves.
I've heard of people doing that. I think as long as that yellow flag is very visible, but the other thing is that could just get hit and then like send you into a ditch. But and maybe you and the whole bicycle will be a bit more visible. But yeah, I think that any way to try to make space for yourself is if it works, go for it. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Martin's asked a gear question. Would you recommend the roll-off gear hub instead of a conventional derailleur gear?
First thing I should say is that I'm not really a kit kind of nerd. I don't really know that much about bikes. I don't care much about. I love bicycles as a mode to travel, but I don't. I'm useless at fixing them, unfortunately. The roll-off hub was for me, because I'm a useless mechanic. I thought it was just going to be easier, right? It's just I didn't have to fiddle with gears as much. It's all just going to be more simple, and that was true until they broke, and they did. I managed to break quite a few of them, but the company were great. They posted me this. So for anyone who doesn't know, roll-off hub is this hub with all the gears are inside, and you don't do much pump and change the oil every so often. When they do break, though, you're stuck, and you won't really find anyone to fix them. And they do occasionally break, although it's supposed to be very unusual. Although I did break quite a few. The company then posted me then to odd places like Mongolia and Sudan, so it was fine in the end. But when they do go, it is quite stressful. I don't really know what I would do now. I think probably roll off. Yeah, probably still roll off.
And how long did you wait maximum time for gear to arrive out with you?
Never more than 5 days or something.
That's pretty handy. Not too bad. Right, Mike has had to zoom off, but it says he's begun reading Robert Foster's book because of your writing, so many thanks. And Anthony's asked if you've ever tried bike rafting. Opens up interesting options for wild camping. Yeah,
that would be great. Never tried it. We'd love to.
Great fun. I've never done it with a bike strapped on the front, but little pack rafts are lots of fun. Yeah, I think that might be it with all the questions. Thank you so much for pouring so much energy into this. And have you got a kind of question if there are any kind of budding cycle tourists out there who haven't done it, or what's your word of advice?
I would say get off the main roads, and if it takes more time, and if it's more difficult, and if it's unpaved or whatever, it doesn't matter. My most vivid memories from this journey is when I kind of got away from the towns and the traffic, and had that sense of vulnerability of being in wild places, which is really the essence of a good adventure. And also people are much more surprised to see you and much more hospitable in these sort of small places. So I got a real kick out of that, I guess. So that's what I would suggest.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Stephen. And a big thanks to everyone. And Stephen, enjoy your 20-mile run this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, everybody.